Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charlie Nickley and I'm the Chief Executive of IAgrE, and I'd like to thank you all for joining our first lecture of 2022, believe it or not. Today, I'd like to welcome Oliver Scott, who is a farm manager at Bradford Estates. Oliver grew up on a farming estate. His father managed and went on to study farm management at Lackham and then agri-food marketing at Harper Adams. His work has taken him as far as Australia, New Zealand and Norfolk before arriving back in the Midlands. So today, Oliver is going to talk about the work he's doing at Bradford Estates to develop sustainable farming practices and a vision for the future. Just before Oliver starts, you're all currently muted. If you'd like to ask questions, then please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll unmute you so you can ask in person. So over to you, Oliver.
So yeah, good afternoon, everybody. As John said, I'm Oliver Scott. I'm the farm manager on the Bradford Estates. I started here back in last February 2021. I was brought in by Bradford Estates to sort of take their farming business model forward. They had been currently contract farming the 4,000 acres that we now have in hand. Historically, probably for the last 40 years, I think the contract farming arrangements were set up in the early 1980s. After Alexander Newport returned home from London, he was doing an overview of the estate, and the farming was something that they were looking at or wanted to take back in hand. So we've moved on from there. They've employed me as a farm manager to come in and manage the Bradford Estates farm. So we've started with a blank piece of paper. We've started with a blank piece of paper, and we've set up our farming operation. The main brief that I had was to look at our farming operation more regeneratively. So that's what I've set out to do. It's been a bit of a challenge. As much as you think you'd be setting up a farm business with a blank piece of paper and you've got the go ahead to buy new machinery, employ people and move forward, it's come with its challenges. It's knowing what to buy first, what machinery needed to be bought, who to employ, and bearing in mind with the whole regenerative model as well. The two contract farming models that we're currently running on the Bradford Estate were very much chalk and cheese. One was very much combinable, adding organic matters back into the rotation, was grazing sheep on keep. The other model was very much letting land. We're in Shropshire here. We've got Newport series land. It lends itself for growing vegetable and lettuce production. So that land was very much on license on one particular farm. So you'd have potatoes followed by lettuces, followed by fodder beet, followed by maize. So they're very two different models of farming practice that we've taken back in hand, and the biggest challenge is now trying to manage them as one whole unit. So it's going to take a bit of time to get our sort of rotation in some sort of order. Part of that is part of that will be to continue letting land under license. We'll continue to do potatoes, we'll continue to do lettuce. We've introduced poppies, which I think is fair. I'd say people would tell me in a regenerative model that actually you shouldn't be looking at growing lettuces and potatoes, but I do feel we should be continuing to grow those crops within the UK. I think it's important we work out how we grow those particular crops more regeneratively. I think that's our challenge, is not just to say we can't grow them because we're regenerative farming and therefore we can't move soil. So that's one thing that we're looking at. When we've geared up machinery wise, we've looking at a mixture of machinery. I think for me, it's always having a system that's very flexible. We're working in the real world, and whether it dictates a lot to us what we can and can't do. So for me, it was having a system that is flexible, that, you know, if worst case scenario we have to plough some land to continue to drilling, or we have to move land a bit deeper, then we're able to do that. So the machinery we've bought very much is min till but zero tillage machine. We have bought a plough. We have got a subsoiler for deep cultivation work if we feel we need it. Another thing we've done more of is to grow a wider range of crops. So we've moved the new rotation has moved to a more of a 1 in 9, where we'll be growing a variety of winter and spring cropping. That includes the licensed land, and we've introduced cover crops in front of all spring crops to try and add organic matter back into the land, especially on those areas that have probably been more intensively farmed. We did a baseline soil survey, which again I will pick up further down in my slides. So we've done a lot of baseline surveys, but one of them was the main one for me was the soil baseline, was to understand what we've got and what I'm inheriting to really help me work out what I need to grow going forward and what will work in the rotation and what won't. And the varied land that I've got within the north and the south of the estate, there's land that is heavier, and I won't ever be able to grow any lettuces or potatoes on that land, but it's very fertile, it's got good organic matter, it lends itself to combinables with having maybe grass and poppies in the rotation. So that particular land, for example, I think and feel we'll get that into the more of the regenerative farming model sooner than perhaps the southern end of the estate, where we're growing a few more invasive crops or more sort of soil damaging crops. I don't know how to word it, but it's that's my view. Again, there's room for improvement on our land for infiltration. We're on free draining land, but there's improvement for water infiltration rates. It's even some of the lighter land where it's been more intensively farmed does take a long time for water to move through that soil profile. So we know it is compacted, but with a more sustainable rotation and cover crops, we will be able to improve that. And we did find worm counts are low. Naturally, our lighter sandy soils, we're not going to have huge worm counts, but even on the sort of heavier medium land, we were counting small numbers of worms. From that's obviously allowing us to add organic matter back into our soil. So we have got more straw for muck deals coming up this coming summer. So we'll hopefully work with Harper Adams and 2 to 3 other local farmers with livestock, so we can do straw for muck to start getting muck back into the estate to start improving organic matters. Our regenerative farming system, as people are well aware, it's for us it's improving the soil health. It's removal of the current barriers for drainage and compaction. A lot of the land has been compacted. There is not a lot of infrastructure, i.e. there hasn't been a lot of field maintenance that's been done in the past. We've got a lot of hedges that are overgrown. We've got a lot of ditches that need ditching out. We've got a lot of land drains that just aren't running. And I think I've got to get my house in order really before I can sort of move on to become what I would class myself as a regenerative farmer. At the moment, I'd say we're sort of on that journey to becoming a regenerative farming, but there's no way we could class ourselves as regenerative farmers at the moment until we get some of these simple things dealt with, the restrictions that are stopping us, crop nutrition, soil nutrition. Having a better understanding of why we're growing crops and will the crops grow in the soil that we're trying to grow them in. There's no point trying to beat soil up to get some of these crops we're thinking about growing, and if they're never going to have the ability to grow them all, we're just going to do more and more damage to the soils trying to achieve it. We're looking at natural fertility. So like I said, we're growing a lot more cover crops. We've got a lot more manures that we're going to use from straw for muck deals. We're using beans more in the rotation to add nitrogen fixing nodules to try and improve nitrogen. We are going to be using molasses in our liquid fertilizer this year. So we're moving from a sort of solid fertilizer usage to liquid fertilizer usage, which will allow us to do more within the ability to add stuff into the liquid, like I say, molasses. We're looking at going into a mid-tier scheme, so our application is in for the mid-tier. So I'm hoping that maybe this month or next month that we will hear back regarding that, and that is geared up around the whole estate to improve pollinators, beneficials, encourage more insects, to try and allow us to use less insecticides. So schemes have been set up where we are growing grass margins under hedges. We're growing flower margins next to grass margins. We're putting more beetle banks in to try and encourage natural predators onto the estate to potentially deal with some of those insect species that we've been using chemical control with. The design, again, of the rotation will allow us to manage weeds. It will allow us to deal with especially bad weed burden fields. We'll be able to control those weeds with more spring cropping. It's allowing us to grow cover crops in between crops. It's also giving us the ability to grow catch crops. So if we are growing potatoes and we are growing lettuces that generally are harvested slightly earlier in this part of the world, you know, we could see land cleared easily in mid to late August. So that gives us the ability to put catch crops in front of the following autumn crop, which would generally be a winter wheat or a winter barley. We're looking at increasing soil biology. Again, it's understanding the soil, it's working with the plants or the varieties that we're growing. So we're looking at growing more blended varieties of winter wheat and spring barley, for example, this year, to see if we can build up a soil biology and plant biology, and see if we can build up almost have a variety that we continue to grow here. We home save that variety, and we sort of build in the resilience of our system, our climate around us, so that sort of variety ends up as a variety that suits what we're trying to achieve on the Bradford Estates. We spoke a lot about to reduce the resilience of fungicides and insecticides. That's what we're trying to achieve with the blended varieties. Something else that we're sort of looking at is our sort of future ambition and goals. And again, that will fit into our regenerative farming model of taking a more analytical or holistical approach of the whole estate and the land use. With planting more hedges, with planting more trees, with adding margins into the farming model, it's going to give us the ability to create more or capture more carbon. Growing more cover crops will help us catch more carbon to potentially turn our business into more of a carbon positive business. Obviously, we've spoke about reducing inputs, tillage, chemicals and fertilizers. Something else that I feel that would be a nice goal to work towards would be to what I would call to become a more closed fertility unit. So trying to produce our own mucks, our own organic matters that we're putting back onto the land, whether that be FYM, whether it be potentially looking at a smaller AD plant that would be self-sufficient for the Bradford Estates itself, but using liquid and solid digestate to use back on the land. Working with local poultry farmers, dairy farmers and our FYM to produce compost that we could potentially put back onto the land, and whether that would ever be achievable and whether we'd be able to move away completely from using bought-in fertilizer, manufactured fertilizer, whether that be solid or liquid, I don't know, but it's something that we're working towards to see if that is achievable. Obviously, where we are today, we're not a mixed farm at all, so we are introducing livestock as we go. So for all the cover crops we've grown this year, we've brought in sheep on keep, so fat lambs and breeding ewes have come in. Other people's sheep, we've got two graziers. We've split the farm up where we've got cover crops, so these guys are grazing off all the cover crops. So then all of those cover crops, I'm hoping we will be able to direct drill into, whether that be spring beans, spring barley or potatoes. Lettuces is a little bit more difficult because of protocols and not being able to graze cover crops in front of them. Hopefully by improving the soil, growing the cover crops, we're also going to improve the water courses and air quality, sequestering more carbon, better root structure, better soil structure will improve water courses. Again, for me, that's very important because of our light land. We do have irrigation on the farm, and it's trying to work out, for me, it's improving the water courses and cleaning up the water, but at the same time, I want to harvest water for crops, and so we're working closely with a company doing a hydrology survey to see if we can achieve that. So the water that lands on the estate, we capture in ditches, in pools, and then we abstract some of that out for reservoir storage to then reuse on the crops, and the cycle starts again. Obviously, by reducing or by increasing our cover crops and making sure that our soils have something growing all the time, we're reducing the soil erosion, which is entering into our water courses. And we're working very closely with Harper Adams, given where we are 15 minutes away to Harper Adams is exploring new ways and new sustainable farming practices that we can work on together. So, for example, we're looking at growing more inter-row crops. So for example, growing maize, if we can continue to grow maize in a system where it's on precision drilling on row systems, that can we inter-row cover crops in the autumn and then drill either side the maize in the spring, but can we take that to the next level and use alternative or more robotic machines to achieve that? So that's something that we're working closely with Harper to see if that is it is achievable, but it's really taking it to the next step that we see it out in field now to see if we can use one machine to do more passes. Can we do more drilling of maize with it? Can we do more hoeing with that particular machine? Future income streams that we are looking at currently: net biodiversity, carbon credits, the elms, SFIs. Mid-tier, we are obviously hopefully entering into a mid-tier. Profit sharing from possible JVs. There's opportunity to work with others moving forward here, that whether it be potatoes, whether it be livestock, there is opportunities of sharing the model, because it's very difficult for me to employ the right people to do the job. Finding good guys or good people to do livestock husbandry, crop husbandry is getting harder and harder. And is there opportunities that we can work with younger people looking to set up their own businesses or wanting to have a bit of a share in a livestock venture, for example, that we can own the sheep and we have a contract shepherd who looks after the sheep and we work together that way. So there's things we're looking at there. Like I say, mid-tier we're already entering into, and we hope we're going to succeed with that. SFIs and elms are slightly unknown. It's difficult to know where they're going to go, but from what little I've seen, there's good and bad press, but I feel that the stuff we're seeing now is okay. I think we've got to try and work with DEFRA. We've got to try and work with the RPA to improve these schemes. I'm just hoping they are going to be as open-minded as they're making out. I've had a few meetings with people from DEFRA, and they seem very much that they want to try and work with landowners, with farmers, but it's what they seem to be lacking is maybe the practical element, and I think maybe that's something we can bring from the farming community into it to make these schemes better. And not poo-poo them straight away when they're first released, but just try and work with them to improve these schemes. And I think there's room for improvement all the time on these sorts of things. Carbon credits, like I say, we would like to generate a carbon positive business here with a view that we would in the future be able to sell carbon credits. But I feel that at the moment we're not quite in that position yet to be selling carbon credits. And I'm reluctant to sign up to a 5 or a 10-year deal at the moment with carbon, because I just don't know what it looks like. And if government policy changes in the future, who knows where it's going to go? And is there going to be the element of, for example, like ourselves here on the Bradford Estates, that we're running a farming business that is carbon positive, but actually we've got our property portfolio, we've got our commercial let portfolio, We're looking at building and developing houses within the estate. Is the wider estate going to be looking to buy carbon credits, and therefore the farming operation is able to sell carbon credits to the wider estate? What we don't want to do is to tie up all the farming carbon credits with a third party and then find out that the wider estate is having to buy credits in to offset for what they're trying to achieve. So we're watching that one very closely. And net biodiversity, I think, has got many legs, and I think there's the ability to probably work with more corporate companies on this one to offset for them to offset their sort of biodiversity. So we are currently we've taken a couple of farms and we're looking at the natural capital on those farms, and we're doing map layers. So we're looking at how the farm looks today, and then layering in different opportunities as we go through. And they're simple things at the moment, like more hedge planting, more in-row tree planting, hedgerow tree planting, looking at putting more grass margin and wider grass margins in, especially next to watercourses, looking at taking undulating land out of production to plant into trees or even small agroforestry operations, clearing out streams, creating more wetland creation. There's a couple of areas where we're looking at digging out the ghost ponds. So historically there's been ponds that have been filled in, and actually this land continues to flood. And we found out that on some old maps that these areas used to be ponds, so it's digging out those ponds. So that's sort of where we are now. It's the maps versus today versus potentially what we could do over the next 3, 4, 5 years. I spoke about baseline surveys earlier and data, and because I think data gathering is going to be really important for all of our, well, especially for a business like this, but I think for many farming businesses out there, that we need to get things to measure ourselves with. And it's okay. I think the farming world is doing a lot already that probably goes unnoticed. But the thing is, and I would be bad for this, that I haven't ever really taken a huge amount of time to do a baseline survey of what something looks like before I started a project and after. And then I haven't gathered that data to be able to look back and say, well, this is what it looked like then, and this is what it looks like now. So I feel that soil structure and health, so soil surveys are really important to understand what soil you've got now, understand your organic matter, understand compaction, etc. Carbon, for me, I've done a carbon baseline survey, but I've based mine on the 2 contract farming operations that have gone out versus what I'm going to try and achieve in hand. So my objectives and KPIs are probably set against what they were doing, but it gives me the ability to improve on things. For an easy goal there is that they weren't growing any cover crops, and we're now growing over 1,000 acres of cover crops. So it's those sorts of things which I could have easily planted cover crops and thought nothing about it, but actually doing the measurements of carbon sequestration and carbon in the soil before I've started planting cover crops is going to allow me to measure that going forward. Land use falls down to the elms and the mid tiers, SFIs. That is that land use good for arable or farming production, or actually do we take it out and do we put it into something else? That corner that consistently fails year in, year out and is only good 1 in 6, is probably losing money the 5 years. Get it out and get it into something that's going to produce a better income but also improve the environment. So we're looking at land use there, which falls back to that natural capital survey that we were doing and mapping. We've done an ecology survey, which we've only really just finished, so we haven't got any findings from that at the moment. But I think what will come from that is it will show us where we need to improve habitat in certain areas of the estate, whether that be back into wetlands, whether it will be on some of the lighter lands, improving the woodland. Hydrology survey we've been doing, again, is working out where all of our water comes. We're at the head of a lot of water. We're at the head of a lot of the catchments here for the River Severn, and we're on light land. We're at the head of a water base, so we're not gifted with water. So it's important that we work out how we sort of generate more or capture more water from the landmass to be able to abstract from the environment back into storage reservoirs, like I was talking earlier, to use going forward. Nutritional density is something that we've looked at. So we've measured all the crops from harvest 2021, which was under the contract farming arrangements, to measure that nutritional density then of winter wheat, winter barley, maize, potatoes, and we were looking at lettuces to see as we go forward if we're improving nutritional density within the crops. Landscape is very similar probably to what I spoke about. Land use but it's taking the view, the Bradford Estates view of that 100-year plan and going back to maps of the 1800s and seeing where there used to be hedgerows, seeing where there used to be infield trees. You know, if we've got fields here that probably have 6 or 7 oak trees in a 20-acre field, and actually should we be continuing to farm that in an arable rotation, or should that be some land that's coming out into more mid-tier or into grassland that we can graze with livestock? So they're the sorts of things we're looking from a landscape point of view. And as it says at the bottom, these will cover a majority of the pillars to natural capital as we move forward. Again, here we're working with a lot of our stakeholders, because to achieve some of the things on the page before for the baselines, I think it's important that we work with our stakeholders. So these guys in front of us, we're working with all of them to see if to move forward, to see what funding there is there, to be exemplars of setting up areas where we can use it as an example for people to come and have a look at. You know, let's put a silt trap in, let's do tracks up, let's dig out ghost ponds, but let's then bring people to it to see how it's achieved and prove that it can be achievable, and you can work the environment alongside a commercial farm that has to make a profit. We've got the Aqualate Mere Catchment Group, and we're just in the realms of setting up the River Wharf Catchment Group, which will become more of a cluster group, which will lend itself to all these, which will come into the land recovery side of it as we understand that more local and wider land recovery. I spoke about the water and irrigation earlier. This is a little bit on the infrastructure of what we are. We for us to be sustainable and continue to do what we're doing, we're looking for an additional 150 to 200,000 cube of water. But like I say, that's not so easy here, because there will be no way we can sink another bore. Most of the brooks and the rivers, there's not a huge amount of water left to catch from there. But what we do have is summer and winter licenses. So we're speaking with the EA to see if we can change summer abstraction to winter abstraction at the same time, see if we can take more water out during the winter months when things are flooded, to fill up reservoirs. So we're looking at possible sites for reservoirs that are closer to those where those water courses are, that we think we can abstract more water from. Again, I want to improve the underground main here. We've got a small amount of underground main, and the reservoirs that are already on the estates aren't linked up. So we're looking at linking up the reservoirs with underground main, so we can transfer water around the wider estate, but not only use it within our own farms, but be able to sell it to tenants next door, and have water there for more people to use. You know, if it allows other people to benefit by letting land out for maybe more high value crops for them, and we're able to sell water to allow them to do that, then that's what we're looking on the wider estate. Reason for doing all this again is to get away from using fossil fuels. So we get away from the diesel and the pump sets we have here and use more electric and renewable power sources. So we can look at putting solar fields in, we can look at putting floating solar panels on the reservoirs, we can look at putting solars around the banks of the reservoirs that potentially will run the pumps. I think we're not a million miles away from being able to store that power in batteries. So we can, during the days when we're producing a lot of power, we can store it for then been able to run pumps during the evenings and in the night using stored power that we've generated during the day. With the operation moving, of taking that land back in hand, we've currently got a 4,000 ton store that was built in 2016, but by 2026, with the extra land that's potentially coming back into the estate, we'll need to be looking at putting at least that sort of storage up again, or looking at different opportunities there. And is there the ability to put a much bigger store in than we really need to be able to let storage? Is there the ability to put a better drying system in, so we're able to dry and then clean other people's product? So they're the opportunities that we've got coming up. We're nicely placed here, just off the M54. We've got the A5 and the A41, so we've got a decent network, and it's easy to get here. So I feel there's lots of opportunities there. And then this is future infrastructure that we could look at going forward. I think if we want to continue to grow potatoes, we want to continue to grow them more sustainably. I can't sit here and say we do want to grow them regeneratively, but I don't know what the regenerative potato model looks like at the moment. But if we want to continue to grow them, but I think from that, growing potatoes and we have no storage for potatoes at the moment, so everything that's harvested currently has got to be harvested off farm, where I feel we lose that control. We don't have that control element of being able to lift when we want to lift. So historically they've probably lifting in conditions that are less than ideal, but maybe by having a potato store here, by having better contracts with our customers, that we'll be able to sort of tailor that potato operation, that we can grow early to mid-season potatoes and lift them into store. There could be the option of vertical farming to pick up where the sort of lettuce and celery job finishes here and moves across to Spain. Is there the ability to do something there to fill that gap? Looking at renewable energy, like I said earlier, is exploring more energies. Can we put ground source in to use the chill for a potato store? Can we use the heat for a grain store? Can that ground source heating system work off solar panels that we've put into a field or off a reservoir? The plan is to go more electric vehicles, estate-wide, farm and estate-wide electric vehicles. Whether we'll see electric tractors, I don't know. Hydrogen to me seems more realistic with what we're trying to achieve on a day-by-day basis, but I'm not sure. It would be nice to see electric tractors. We're not quite sure that perhaps is around the corner. I think we'll see the smaller robotic type electric machines than those. Rainwater harvesting, with all the building that we potentially can do in the future, there's the opportunity again to save the water coming off of yards and roofs. And then there's the opportunity to set up the livestock enterprises to help sort of produce this sort of closed fertility unit that I talk about, and whether that will be possible. So I don't know how I'm doing for time, but that's sort of the end of my presentation. Happy to answer any questions if there are any out there.
Yeah, you've got lots of questions, so it's great. There's a bit of time left at the end. So yeah, the first question is from Declan Flynn. Do you want to unmute, Declan?
Hi guys. Somebody tipped me off that the looping in the trench in slide 5 down the left-hand corner is heating. It's used for heating. Slide 5.
Yeah, there was a picture of some looked like ground source heat pipe.
Yes, yes.
So that was kind of something I was surprised to see, but I know now in your last slide you talk about chilling, cooling. So and pulling energy out of the ground, I guess that's what you're doing. So you often pull energy out of the ground for cooling and for heating up other things. And why would you heat the ground, I wonder?
So I'm not an expert on ground source at all, but you use the ground source for the heat. So you're pulling the heat from the ground, and the waste product from that is the chill, and that's where where people struggle to use that waste product being the chill. So people are using ground source a lot for heating buildings. They're using it for drying grain, but the chill is something that people struggle to use, and therefore the few meetings that I've had with people to do a ground source is that there's the potential to then use that chill on something else. Now I use a grain store, for example, but that could be anything really to do with the fresh produce world.
So in the winter, when the crops need to have frost, vegetables need to be hit with frost to make them go through their life cycle. Is that part of chilling? Can you chill the underneath of the ground to help vegetables or not?
I think the coils in the ground are more to do with taking the heat source from the ground, opposed to chilling the crop in the ground.
Yes. Okay.
So that coil that you saw in the ground is where the water moves through, and as it moves through the coils, it warms up before it enters the building.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Tim Reynolds has a couple of questions.
Yeah, a great talk. Thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions, chap. One is, what sort of software are you using, and what evaluation have you done of software titles for your land management and maybe modelling? And that's one question. The other question is, obviously, are you observing any compaction from sheep and cattle during the over the winter period and early spring, particularly sheep?
Yeah, so the first question, the mapping and the modelling. So from a cropping point of view, we have gone with Muddy Boots and a mapping program called Omnia, which are working very good together at the moment. But estate-wide, we've been having this debate for a long time now, and we still can't put our finger on the pulse for the right program to use for doing the wider mapping. It wants to be GSI, but it also because of the wider estate, from a managing director down to the guys on the ground, there's so many people that we need to use this program. So, for example, the question came the other day: we need a system that we can pull up on our mobile phone, so you know where you are on a certain part of the estate. It's finding a program that we can count the trees and then make notes of the species of those individual trees and then mark them on a mapping tool. And I know there's lots out there, but we're not sure which way to go at the moment and which is the right program. We're sort of between a rock and a hard place. There's loads of different models out there, and everyone we talk to, like Dutcher Cornwall, the guys doing the ecology survey, the guys doing the hydrology, they're all using different mapping programs. And it feels like to me that we could go off on another tangent with another mapping program. We just got loads of different data that we can't necessarily combine. So for me, it's finding, I want all of that data in one area: farming, estate, housing, whatever it may be. And no, I don't feel we've got there yet. And compaction, I haven't grazed any cattle outside, so we've only been grazing sheep. And I've tried to minimize the compaction to the best of my ability so far without putting a spade in just yet, because we're only just finishing grazing some of them. But instead of grazing some of these crops right down to the bare bones, I'm leaving a bit of green leaf and a bit of stalk to hopefully try and keep those roots alive. So to a degree, it's still growing a bit to try and eliminate any compaction cause. But sheep don't seem to be compacting the land too much at the moment. We don't allow them to graze too heavily. It's quite extensive stocking rates when they're not jammed into fields or anything like that.
Thanks for that, Tim. Brian Matthews, got a couple of questions.
Thank you. And Oliver, inspirational talk, actually. Really, really good to hear about what you're doing. My question is about use of strip farming, the sort of popular way things seem to be going with regenerative grazing is that you have your sheep or your cattle in strips, and I was wondering if you were doing that, although of course that might have an impact on your compaction. And the second question, if I may, is around maize. I was interested to see you're growing maize. That, of course, has a rather bad reputation in terms of soil degradation. So I was just wondering how you kind of deal with that issue. Thank you.
So maize will be the first crop I grow on the Bradford Estates, but I've been growing maize for a few years now in my previous roles. And yes, there is the element of compaction with maize. There is the element of destroying land, trying to get maize off a field at the wrong time of year. But I have done experimental work with strip till. So to the point that I was cover cropping land and then stripping it out with a machine. I actually used the Caverl and Colty strip. That's what I did most of my work with, and experimented Colty stripping in the autumn and Colty stripping in the spring to see which gave me the best results. And then we would then drill into that strip. And I found that growing maize on more of a strip till system, either whether you strip it in the autumn or the spring, that if the weather was slightly against you and the land conditions were wetter, actually we weren't seeing the compaction. There was compaction there, don't get me wrong, but we weren't seeing the amount of compaction on those strip till fields versus something that we maybe have deep cultivated or ploughed. I think because the root systems are there, the small roots or fine roots that will get down to meters down below the subsoil, allowing that water to filtrate through, which is actually making the land drier in the top levels, which is where we weren't seeing as much compaction. But it's like all of these crops, if the weather's against you, they're going to make a mess, and that's what we've got to try and avoid or try and manage more sustainably.
And the issue of soil loss with the maize?
No, so I don't see that, because I cover crop land before maize, and anything after maize is either cover cropped or is planted into a crop of wheat or barley. So I don't have that element of maize stubble all over the winter. Okay.
And how about the issue of grazing in strips? So which is kind of what the Americans are pushing.
So I haven't got as far as that. We've been looking, so the grazing of I think as far as I would get at the moment, if I could design a system, which I know people are doing, that we would either could grow grass in between the maize, so that the grass is planted either earlier or at the same time as the maize, that you would then whole field graze that maize stubble. That could work, but I still feel there's an element of, there's not a huge ground coverage on that to stop erosion. The grazing that I have been looking at doing in strip grazing is more looking at agroforestry and having trees with grass in the middle, and then I just graze the grass. But I think what I'd like to do as a next step is be able to grow these cover crops in the strip, and then drill the other side of the strip would get drilled into the maize. That's my long-term goal.
Brilliant, thank you.
I'll sneak a question in myself before we move on to Rupert's. When you've got maize and you've got the cover crop, how do you find the soil conditions when you harvest the maize? Does it make a lot of difference in terms of having something growing in there as well as the maize?
Yeah, it 100% it helps, because the maize is fine in those rows, but it's the in between that where we're seeing problems of maybe slight compaction, maybe a bit of runoff. It's those bare rows, because as you know, maize, most people are planting maize on 75 centimeters. That's quite a big gap across a whole field. So the soil is in better condition after having something growing in there all the time, and you are seeing less erosion from it.
Rob Simmons has got a question.
It's really interesting. Thanks very much, Oliver. It's interesting what you're talking about. I had a recent visit before Christmas to a grower down near Petworth,
okay,
who's also growing lettuce, potatoes, looking at regenerative agriculture. With your maize, are you planting the companion crop at the same time as you're drilling your maize, or are you drilling it, let's say, 6 weeks after the maize is established?
I've been drilling them either a fraction in front, so
right,
I've only done a bit of grass, so yeah. So my system to keep to keep it simple, I've worked a field and then whole field drilled it with grass, and then I've gone back through and drilled maize into that. Yeah. So the grass isn't established.
Yeah.
But they almost established together.
Yeah. And then the maize shades it out during the maize growth period, harvest the maize, and you've got a cover there.
Yeah, and then you've got some grass. And I haven't tried it with anything else, but hence my view, if you could strip a cover crop in the autumn, and that was just growing in those strips, and then all you needed to do is come back in the spring and then drill in between the strips of cover crop, could you just leave the cover crop growing, or would it swamp out the maize? I don't know.
Yeah, we did something similar over near Ely. We know wheat, maize, lettuce rotation with a number of different companion crops that we drilled at the same time as the maize with a Pottinger star drill.
Yes.
So we could get the companion crop as it was then and the maize at the same time.
Yeah.
With your the comment you had about the potatoes and having potatoes in rotation, and whether or not it's a regenerative, if it's possible to have it in a regenerative rotation, it's quite interesting because you've got, what's your period between potato crops? It's 6 or 8 years.
I'm aiming for a 9 year.
A 9 year.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got 9 years of regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
Building up your soil structure.
Yeah.
Have the potatoes, reprofiling, but maybe not knocking it back as far as you would have done without the 9 years of regenerative agriculture.
But can we and I feel that the regenerative agriculture will help a crop like potatoes, because it's going to get the land in better order, better structure, better nutrients. It's going to be behaving better, that perhaps we don't have to work, like you say, work it as hard to get it where we need it.
Yeah. Now we did some work with Greenvale and Sainsbury's a few years ago, and NIAB Cuff, looking at different doing a shallower tillage for potatoes, and also changing the web size on the destoner without any negative impact on yield or increasing greening or anything like that. So it's quite interesting. I think it's possible.
I think it's the destoners really that do a huge amount of the damage, and funnily enough, I'm surrounded by guys growing potatoes because of the area, but there is a handful of guys that aren't destoning, and they haven't been for a long time, and actually arguably their soil is in slightly better condition than those that are destoning. So it's it's all possible.
I've got one last question if I can. So with your potatoes, what we've also done quite a bit on is the tramline management. So have you looked at using the Wonder Wheel or Briggs Tide Ridger or anything like that?
Yeah, so here we are tramlining potatoes, and when I was in Norfolk, I was working quite closely with them with the not the Wonder Wheel but the Crake, which was the machine that we put the small holes in the top of the bed. And
the AgriWheel.
The AgriWheel, that's it. So I was working quite closely with them when they were designing that. And that's got huge potential.
Yeah, it has. Okay, love to talk more. Okay, thank you.
All my contact details I'm not sure if they're there, but
okay, thanks.
I'm happy for them to be shared.
Okay, Paul Skinner has the next question.
Thank you, Charlie. Oliver, really good presentation. The enthusiasm's coming off you. Great to see. Throughout the presentation, you've mentioned partnerships, both the estate partnerships and also external ones. How important are these to your sustainable model ongoing?
Very. I think with the world we live in at the moment and struggling to find the right people to come on board, I think there's opportunity. The opportunity is greater by being able to offer someone a proportion of a business or a partnership, and allow the youngsters to get into it and get them set up. And I think this is an opportunity. I say that because I'm a farm manager's son, and I would have done anything. I'd have loved my own place. And I think I see this as an opportunity to try and help get people on the ladder and work the model together, for sure. I think it incentivizes people better.
Okay, Ken Pollock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I hesitate to say anything to someone like Mr. Scott, who's actually doing the job. I mean, 6 years ago, I thought I might do a farm manager, and I decided it was far too much like hard work. And you're managing 4,000 acres, which is just astonishing. But the question I asked was actually about carbon sequestration, because a lot of people talk about farming as a place to store carbon, maybe trees, maybe peat, but also farming. And my understanding is this not very much. I mean, I read Dieter Helm's book, Net Zero. It talks a lot about it there as absolutely nothing. You've got to get to his other book, Green and Prosperous Land, page 266. How much carbon is there in soils? And I just wonder whether you had any idea of really how much you might be able to store in that fashion. Just before I shut up, I noticed that our president, Paul Hemingway, has joined us as well, former student of mine. Excellent.
We have done a carbon baseline survey here, and the current soils, I must admit, aren't sequestering a lot of carbon. We're sequestering maybe 1 to 1.5 tons of carbon in that soil. But where I think people have, I wouldn't say going wrong, but I think it's a huge learning curve for us. I think people don't sample soil deep enough to understand what's going on with soil carbon. I think they measure the first sort of maybe 15 centimeters, but actually there's way more going on 30, 60, even 90 centimeters below that. I think if people started sampling lower, that you'd probably work out that there's way more sequestration going on than we think, and actually we could be locking up a lot more carbon. Roots of cover crops get down to 1 meter, so they're drawing stuff in. I think it's nothing new, is it? You know, we've been growing crops for 100 years and they've been pulling carbon in. I think where we've been going wrong is we've probably been leaving more and more land barer and barer to get stale seedbeds to, you know, Roundup's probably caused a lot of that, is that we've been able to be arguably slightly more lazy and not have to do a huge amount about it until the spring, where we go and burn it off and drill into it. It's an easy system, and therefore are we not sequestering as much as we probably used to historically through the same area of land, if that makes sense.
I had a word with Andy McDonald at Rothamsted. I mean, they're on Broadwalk, they put 15 tonnes per hectare per acre of farmyard manure on arable crops for 180 years, and the accumulation of carbon has been 1% a year. So it's a little bit soul destroying. Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Mark Andrews. Probably got time for another couple more questions.
Well, hello, Oliver. I mean, what a fantastic presentation, and what a good boss. And I'm really pleased to hear that you're supporting new people moving into agriculture. That's a delight. Regarding your potential solar electric projects and capability, are you considering that as a microgrid, or are you going to feed in and out of the mains, or is that too early, especially with your thoughts on electric vehicles and potentially electric robots, etc.?
I think at the moment I probably get slightly blinkered of looking at my farming operation, and I'm working on a wider estate here that's sort of as equally as motivated as me, that I've started looking at bigger, and actually what I thought probably would be a micro actually should be a macro. You know, I think we've got the ability to put solar onto land that it probably doesn't lend itself to mid-tier, it doesn't lend itself to arable, that it could be put into solar, and we could sell that energy. We've got RAF Cosford, we've got what else? We've got David Austin Roses next door. We've got loads of other people that we could potentially sell electric to, as well as sort of producing our own electric vehicles. You know, the ambition here is that all estate vehicles will be electric within the next sort of 4 years. And the biggest problem is my farm truck. There isn't a huge amount out there at the moment that's electric for a farm truck, but actually all of the directors are on electric cars now, and the next stage of building maintenance vans will be electric. So we're slowly moving that way. But yeah, I've been looking at more micro than macro.
Okay, Paul Hemingway.
Yeah, very, very quickly, Oliver, fascinating talk. And I mean, clearly, you know, I'm sure quite a lot of us logged in today expecting to see, a fully up and running regenerative setup. You've been brutally honest in terms of where you are.
Yeah.
In terms of your business plan, how long do you think it's going to be before you can turn to the shareholders and say, okay, I'm pretty happy to claim now that Bradford Estates, Weston Park really is farming on a regenerative basis?
I've done my business plan and modelling over 6 years, and I don't think I will be 100% regenerative farmer by then. I think it's 7 or 8 years, potentially even a whole rotation to be properly regenerative. There's so much going on. There's so much to understand with soil biology, plant biology. It's almost like being a scientist sometimes, not a farm manager. And it's a massive learning curve for me, and I'm doing it step by step, but sort of pushing it hard to understand it. But yeah, there's no way I can stay here today and say we're regenerative farming. No way. We just about did some direct drilling this year, and we're a long way off being a direct driller, really.
Yeah. Thank you very much. You've had a massively busy year. Stepping into a 4,000 acre setup, basically with call it a greenfield site. It's perhaps not as green as you'd want it to be, just.
No. Yeah.
But to say you've been busy would be an understatement, I would think.
Thank you.
Okay, we've probably got time for one more question from Rodri Williams. I know his mic's not working, so I'll ask the question for him. He's obviously spotted banks contractors, and the question was basically, do you rely on contractors for a lot of the work, or do you plan on buying more machinery yourselves?
There's a big debate here whether we should do more with contracts or whether we should do more in hand. So one of my sort of models was to probably, with all the changes we've got coming in agriculture with technology, electric, etc., which I keep talking about, was to contract hire. So a lot of my bigger machinery, my tractors, combines, I've contract hired for now, because I've done it on 3-year deals, because what I didn't want to do is commit into buying something that I've got to depreciate over a 6 or 8 year period to find out that I'm then behind with the time. So I've sort of left my system quite flexible there from a tractor point or a moving unit point of view. All the machinery that I've bought behind, we've bought, and that's like I said earlier, it's a flexible system. But we will use, so for example, the potato job, I'm not going to invest in a huge amount of potato machinery, and I've got 2 very good neighbours next door that have got all the kit. One's just bought a new potato planter this year with GPS steering on the potato planter, and actually he can come and do our potatoes effectively way more efficiently than I can probably do it by buying a second-hand bit of kit. So I'd like to sort of work with my JV model, say that actually the JV company hires in these contractors like our next door neighbour to do the planting, and it keeps it quite local, and it keeps it under control. They're working with the same people we work with, they're working under the same climate, so it's not like I'm waiting for someone to come miles away to help, and actually working with close contractors gives us that control element as well, which is important for regenerative agriculture if we're going to look after the soils.
Okay, we better draw it to a close now, just at 1 o'clock. So thank you, Oliver, for giving us an excellent presentation and pulling that together. It's really appreciated. Yeah, I think you can tell by the amount of questions that everybody's found it really interesting. I'm sure we could chat on for hours on the subject. So thanks a lot for that, really appreciated.
Brilliant.
I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and hope you will join us for our next lecture on the 15th of February, where we're going to be joined by IAgrE member Richard Farnish, who's the Technical Director at the Wolfson Centre, and he's going to be talking about bulk solids handling. So all that's left to say is thanks for everybody joining, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.